So imagine waking up one day and realizing that in the Middle East, Amazon isn't the only heavyweight in town. In fact, there's a challenger bold enough to throw down billions just to carve out its place. That company is Noon, and its story is one of the gutsiest battles in modern e-commerce. When you think of Amazon, the image that comes to mind is an unstoppable giant. Click, buy, and boom, it's at your doorstep. But in the Middle East, Amazon's dominance wasn't written in stone. The region had its own quirks, its own needs, and its own gaps. For years, people were frustrated, deliveries dragged on, addresses didn't always make sense to the systems global companies were used to. Many customers preferred to pay in cash rather than trusting credit cards or digital wallets. And while demand for online shopping was rising fast, the supply side wasn't catching up with expectations. That's the setting Noon walked into, and instead of tiptoeing around, it came charging in with billions in backing and a mission to prove that homegrown solution can stand toe-to-toe with Silicon Valley titans. Let's rewind a little. Around 2016, e-commerce in the Middle East was still young compared to the US or China. People were online, sure, but the experience wasn't smooth. That's when Amazon decided to make a move, scooping up a platform called Souq.com. It was a sensible way for Amazon to plant its flag. Souq already had customers, warehouses, and recognition, but rebranding Souq into Amazon wasn't enough to erase the fact that customers still had pain points. Packages went missing, delivery drivers struggled with vague addresses, payment habits didn't line up neatly with Amazon systems. This wasn't a plug-and-play region. Then Noon appeared, backed by a combination of local investors, including deep pockets from Saudi Arabia. Noon launched with ambition few had seen before in the region. This wasn't a scrappy startup trying to hustle its way to market share with a clever app. This was a company that set aside $2 billion just to build a foundation. Think about that, $2 billion before even proving profitability. That's not throwing spaghetti at the wall. That's walking into the kitchen with a truckload of pasta and building a whole new restaurant around it. From the very beginning, Noon played a different game than Amazon. Amazon relied on its global reputation and efficiency, but Noon leaned into being local. It built warehouses and places where Amazon was slow to establish. It hired drivers by the tens of thousands. It adjusted to the fact that many customers still wanted to hand over cash at the door rather than trust online payments. It spoke the language, literally and figuratively, and it made sure that local merchants had a place to sell without being drowned out by international giants. Noon's rise wasn't just about money, it was about identity. In regions where people often felt like global companies overlooked them, Noon said, "This is for us, by us." It branded itself as the homegrown alternative, something built with cultural quirks in mind. Where Amazon sometimes looked like an outsider trying to fit in, Noon wore the local badge proudly. Of course, that didn't mean the journey was easy. Logistics in the Middle East can be brutal. You've got sprawling desert, chaotic urban layouts, and customers who expect reliability without always being easy to reach. Noon had to build systems from scratch to make deliveries smoother. Warehouses had to be stocked strategically, fleets had to be optimized, and technology had to catch up fast. All that infrastructure doesn't come cheap. But Noon knew that without solving those headaches, no amount of flashy marketing would win customers over. Another big play Noon made was investing heavily in grocery delivery. Now, groceries online sound great on paper, but in practice, it's a nightmare. Fresh produce has to stay fresh. Cold chains need to hold steady from the warehouse to the doorstep. One delay, one melted carton of ice cream, and trust is gone. Noon went after this challenge anyway because they knew whoever cracked groceries would lock in repeat customer. People buy phone once every couple of years. People buy tomato every week. If you can become the go-to for tomato, the rest of the cart follows. Meanwhile, Amazon wasn't letting up. With its global machine behind it, Amazon poured resources into improving local operations. But what Noon had was patience and a willingness to lose money upfront if it meant long-term dominance. Remember, 2 billion was just the start. Noon was willing to run on thin margin or even no margin if it meant convincing customers to switch habits. Promotions, flashy sales events, and endless discounts were all part of the game. For shoppers, this was golden. Suddenly, prices were competitive, deliveries were faster, and options were broader. Competition, in this case, was a blessing. Noon also knew that trust was everything. In markets where people still worried about online scams or bad service, Noon made return easy. If something went wrong, they wanted customers to feel protected. They leaned into customer service and visibility. They built brand campaigns that screamed reliability and pride in being regional. Slowly, people stopped asking if Noon was just a copycat of Amazon and started seeing it as a true rival with its own identity. But here's where it gets interesting. Noon isn't just fighting Amazon. It's also up against a flood of other competitors, from fast fashion apps like Shein to global furniture brand pushing online sale, and even smaller niche platforms that chip away at specific categories. Noon has to defend its turf not just from one giant, but from an army of contenders. And that's where its massive infrastructure investment really matter. If you've already built the warehouse, train the fleet, and scale the system, you're harder to dislodge. It's the digital version of building castles and fortresses. Expensive, but once they're there, good luck to the invaders. The most fascinating part of Noon's story is how it highlights the importance of localization. Global giants often think scale is enough, that the system that works in the US, Europe, or China can simply be dropped into any new market. Noon proves that's not true. People in different regions shop differently. They expect different payment options, different customer support, different delivery experience. If you ignore those details, you leave the door wide open for someone who's willing to sweat them. Noon walked through that door with a checkbook and a vision. Now, let's talk about what all this means for customers. If you live in the Middle East, you've seen the change with your own eyes. Packages that once felt like they were crawling across continents now show up at your door in hours, or at worst, a couple of days. That kind of speed wasn't even a dream a decade ago. Groceries that used to wilt before they got to you now arrive fresh, chilled, and on time like clockwork. And prices? They've become far more competitive because when two giants are battling for your wallet, you suddenly get the perks. Discounts, flash sale, loyalty program, every tactic is designed to keep you shopping. On top of that, the level of trust has grown. Both Noon and Amazon know that in a market where loyalty is still young, they can't afford sloppy mistakes. Every missed delivery or bad experience is a chance for customers to switch sides, and that pressure makes them sharper. It's like having two master chefs fighting to cook you dinner every night. You don't just get fed, you get spoiled. But Noon isn't stopping here. The company is already hinting at going public, with potential listing in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. That's a huge step because it signals confidence, not just in its growth, but in its ability to deliver steady profits in the future. An IPO would also open the door to everyday investors in the region, letting the very customers who order from Noon become part owner in its journey. Picture that, a platform that started out as a daring experiment to take on Amazon, now gearing up to ring the stock market bell with billions in value attached to its name. At that point, you can't call it a scrappy underdog anymore. That's when it transformed into a cornerstone institution, one that doesn't just compete in the market but helps define it. So will Noon actually beat Amazon? That's the $1 million question, or maybe the $2 billion one. Going head to head with Amazon and winning outright is a monumental task. Amazon has decades of global experience, ocean of customer data, and a playbook that has been refined across continents. It's not a company that folds easily, but here's the twist. Noon doesn't need to destroy Amazon to declare victory. Simply holding its ground, grabbing a sizable slice of the market and becoming the default choice for millions of Middle Eastern shoppers is already a massive achievement. And in some places, Noon has started to edge ahead in brand recognition, slipping into conversation where Amazon used to be the only name that mattered. That's not a fluke, that's traction. The real contest here isn't about who wears the crown everywhere, it's about who matters most in the region. Noon has proven that size isn't the only metric of power. Fit matters just as much, if not more. A local company that knows how people shop, how they pay, and what they expect can often feel more relevant than a global juggernaut. Noon understands the nuances: speedy delivery in chaotic cities, trust building in a cash-first culture, customer service that speaks the language and gets the tone right. Amazon, on the other hand, excels at efficiency, scale, and global standards. Both are strengths, but they reflect two very different philosophies. And in markets where culture and trust weigh heavily, the homegrown option suddenly carries more weight than anyone expected. Of course, risks remain, and they are not small ones. Noon can't run on investor optimism forever. It eventually has to prove it can turn consistent profit quarter after quarter. The pressure is real because scaling fast is exciting, but staying profitable is what keeps the lights on in the long run. And it's not just Amazon breathing down its neck. Every global app with a delivery button is trying to carve out a slice of the Middle East, from fast fashion giant to grocery upstart to niche platform with hyper-focused audience. That's a lot of elbows at the same table. On top of that, the region itself isn't the easiest playground. Political tensions, regulatory changes, and economic ups and downs can throw curveballs at any moment. Add in the logistical headaches, desert terrain, sprawling cities, inconsistent infrastructure, and you see why it's a high-stakes balancing act. Noon also has to remember that customer loyalty here is thin ice. People love deals and speed, but one stretch of late delivery, one too many out-of-stock messages, or a single bad return experience can push shoppers straight into a competitor arm. Switching apps takes less effort than brewing a cup of tea. So the challenge for Noon is not just to grow, but to keep delighting customers every single day while managing all those moving parts behind the curtain. Yet, the momentum Noon has built can't be ignored. In less than a decade, it's gone from an ambitious newcomer to a household name across major markets. It's forced Amazon to adjust. It's pushed other players to step up. And it's given customers more power than ever before. In business, that's the mark of a real contender, not just existing alongside giants, but forcing them to change their game. So here's the big picture. Noon challenged Amazon not by trying to be Amazon, but by being Noon, by throwing billions into infrastructure, by obsessing over local quirks, by branding itself as the proud regional option, and by refusing to accept that dominance was predetermined. It's a story about money, yes, but also about vision and execution. And it's still unfolding. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most fascinating rivalries in modern business, make sure to hit like, drop a comment with your thoughts on who's going to come out on top, and share this with someone who loves hearing about underdogs that punch above their weight.